We are live on YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. This is your new Friday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, hangout with the Tech Bros, Mary MacCarthy and Lauren Balik. Hey, bro. Hey, Lauren.
What's going on, bro? How's your week been? It's been a big week in tech with the layoffs, and I feel like I could say that at any week in the last couple of months. But
That's
it's
going to
been a
be
big
every
week.
week for like the next 2 to 3 months, and then maybe it's going to hit other sectors. Fortunately, you and I are not concerned. Our hearts go out to everybody who is, but I've got a big problem actually at the top of my mind concerning this show, which is I'm not like super up to date on tech bro jokes. I've got like the Patagonia and the kombucha, but that's like a little bit dated. So I'm hoping that you and also our viewers and listeners will be sending me some ideas on how to make those a bit more, I'm not in the Bay Area, a little bit more in tune with the real tech bro vibe or mood these days. So
Well, I think if we look at the classic late 2010s tech bro, it's Patagonia vests or the different versions of that have come about. Like there's what's the new one called? Quaya Hoctol or something, or there's
I
a
don't
new
even
like
know.
vest company out there. Yeah, I mean whatever. I mean I think I have one.
Ayahuasca.
No, it's not well, ayahuasca is a different topic. Um some of the bros are into that. But no, the it's 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 gone from natty light, cheap beer, expensive drinks,
Uh-huh.
which is like, when I started my tech career, it was cheap beer, expensive cocktails. Now it's all kind of converged on like the Cutwaters, the Trulies, the everything else of
See,
what
I
is
don't
the
even know
like
if those are
drink of
beers or
choice.
teas or cannabis, but
No,
we're gonna
they're like,
keep going.
yeah, no, they're like when I started my tech career like 10 years ago, it was cheap beer, but expensive cocktails is the way it went. But now it's all kind of converged, and there's like, Cutwaters, which is like, they'll make like Long Island iced teas, like with the vodka and everything else in the can. And it's much less of a natty light bro scene now. Like, oh, you're drinking with the boys, you're drinking with the lads, hanging out, drinking cheap beer. But during the week, if you got to go out with a client, you got to go out with, a customer, an investor, or somebody. You're going to take them out to a nice place and drink, $18 cocktails. Now it's all kind of converged on like seltzers and like different versions of nice seltzers. So I don't know
And
what to
like
make of that.
mocktails, there's a whole like sober movement.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a different
there
vibe.
is there's a whole sober movement, and it happens every January the last couple of years because people
That's
do
true,
dry
dry
January.
January.
But I definitely think that it's going to be a thing, and like these canned cocktails, alcoholic or not, are definitely becoming a thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, someone who's rocking the Tech Bro jokes is our Tech Bro of the Week. We've decided we're going to do a weekly segment, talk about a Tech Bro of the Week. People we love or hate or somewhere in between. Never mean, always fun. And this week we're highlighting somebody we love. Tell us about him. He's a Tech Bro TikToker who is hilarious.
Yeah. So yeah, we're starting the Tech Bro of the Week. Um, bro can mean whatever you want it to mean. It can be a lady bro, non-binary bro, doesn't matter. It's just a bro of the week. And the best guy I've seen in the last, I don't know, 6 months or so is
Ever in history,
Corp.
he's so good.
He's so good. I mean, and I think he's actually figured out how to like turn this into a job. Like he works at Red Point Ventures, which is a venture capital firm that they've invested in a bunch of different companies. I mean, if people know me, I come from a data background. They've invested in Looker, Omni, a bunch of other companies. But Rashid Asir, or Rashad Asir, best corporate bro that I've seen in a long time. He does a ton of stuff on TikTok. Corporate, CORPRO. Rayshid. He's got some of the funniest stuff out there. And, we're going to do Tech Bros of the Week going on.
Yeah, and
Going
he's got
forward.
an open invitation onto the show. Check out his TikTok. I think he's just on, most of his TikToks appear on the Red Point TikTok. I think just at Red Point. He's easy to find, but he's definitely like my model in terms of someone who really understands the subtleties of this humor. So Rashid or Rasad, I'm sorry, I messed up his name. Rasad Ashir, right? Yes.
Yeah.
You've got an open invitation. We'd love to have you on and you can teach us something. Let's dive into this week's show and bring the guests right on. We're talking about devrel, and you can introduce them or have them introduce themselves as I bring them into the stream. Elena Latte and Mark Erickson. Hey, guys.
Yeah. We're doing a show this week on devrel, developer advocacy, evangelism, how these terms get mixed, what works, what doesn't, how to do this right, how it goes wrong. There's a lot of talk about incentives around what makes a good devrel or a good developer advocate. On one side you have people saying like, oh, well, this is just sales, but as a developer, it's a salesperson, but with an M1 MacBook. And on the other side, you have people saying like, no, this is the best way to do bottoms up. This is how we, get in front of people, get people to start using our product in the most efficient way possible, the way that a salesperson never could, potentially promote. So I'm excited. I have a lot of opinions about the terminology and where things go right and wrong. But I'm excited to have both of our guests on. And Mark, if you want to introduce yourself, would love to hear your background.
Hi, yeah, my name is Mark Erickson. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm super happy to be here. So I work at a company called Fly.io. It's a platform for hosting software applications. It's like if you think of on this spectrum of Heroku to AWS, we're closer to the Heroku side in terms of kind of how we're positioned. But we have some unique things there too. And personally, I am doing what I guess you call developer relations. And I come from the Elixir community, it actually is a real programming language. It's been around for 10 years. And it's built on top of the Erlang virtual machine, which is 30 plus years old and really battle tested. So we do some fun, exciting stuff, but I've been helping to build out more of the other frameworks that we want to target and support at Fly. So, reaching out and helping to recruit people in the Ruby and Rails and PHP, Laravel and Django, trying to help build that presence there. So that's the perspective I'm coming from.
Love it. Delighted to have you here. And Elena, give us your intro, and then we're going to hear more about what Eric has to say in his experience in developer relations, how it might be different from yours.
Hi, so it's super nice to meet everyone here. Also, thank you for the invite. My name is Elena Lape. I am the founder of HoloPin, which is a digital badge platform for developers. So we do digital badges and micro recognitions that organizations, typically developer-first organizations, give out to their users, their community, as a form of incentive and then recognition. I got into development and developer relations really through hackathons, probably. And when I was a student, I used to really like just building things, and then I got into the organizing side, started running some tech communities, started also running some meetups, giving talks, and doing things from that education perspective as well. So educating developers and students on how to use particular software and how to build things. Then I also used to run developer product partnerships at GitHub Education, so namely for the program called the GitHub Student Developer Pack, where we worked with a lot of different dev tools to offer something good to students. And then for the last few years or so, before I started HoloPin, I did developer relations consulting. So helping companies understand what developer relations is, how to do it in like an honest way that isn't necessarily salesy. So I think, yeah, there will be some spicy takes there. But yeah.
Love it. Love it. Thank you. Thank you both. I'm going to give like a 30-second intro on what the history of DevRel is. I could be entirely wrong. If I'm wrong, Wikipedia is wrong. So let me just do that. And then the three of you can jump in and correct me, and we'll start with that. So per Wikipedia, ChatGPT said pretty much the same thing. They just had a much more concise and more eloquent answer. DevRel, developer relations, is an umbrella term that refers to the strategies and tactics for building and nurturing a community of mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and software developers. I'm doing this because I think a lot of people who aren't doing DevRel don't actually know what it is, right? So I think it's worth getting that definition out there. Where did DevRel come from? Apple historically is seen as having launched the first DevRel program back in the 80s, starting with Mike Murray, who apparently coined the term software evangelist to persuade third-party developers to develop stuff for the Macintosh platform. It really caught on more broadly and more mainstream around 2013 with companies like New Relic, Twilio, and others who kind of, started putting DevRel out there, I guess, as a term. Today, the titles that you get when you're hired into this vary. It can be developer advocate, I guess just DevRel person, I don't know. In the data space, which is where the subset of tech that Lauren and I both work in, they often call it data evangelist or data advocate. And then these roles, this is what I'm not as clear on. These roles can, I think, depending on the company, the size of the company, the nature of the company, they can sit on various teams, like maybe engineering, obviously marketing. I don't know if they ever sit in sales. So let's start there, Elena or Mark. Does that ring true to you, that definition and history, or am I totally off base?
What's interesting for me is this is my first position being in what you'd call DevRel. It's like I don't have a lot of the years of previous experience working at different places to have the comparison. And I know the way we do things at Fly is kind of unique. So I'm really interested to hear more on your guys' perspectives and where things have gone off the rails in bad directions too. But yeah.
Awesome.
Well, Elena, you've worked in DevRel and you've been a DevRel consultant. So you've probably seen everything. Like where, in your opinion, like where does this go right? Where does it go wrong? Like, do you report up to product? Are you part of sales and marketing, go to market? Like how does that all work in your mind?
This depends so much on the organization and what, or rather why they're hiring a developer advocate. And maybe that's where I'm going to bring in that first thing where it goes wrong. Is when companies hire one because it seems like everyone else has got one. And so this is going to be a way for us to get basically cheap or free marketing without having to spend money on ads or do any of the flashy things that developers is perceived to be too salesy. So as to where should the DevRel organization sit, as I said, it really depends on the company. So something that's, for instance, an open source, whether it's being, commercial open source or non-commercial open source, I guess we're talking about companies, so it has to be that. Of course, then in that case, engineering probably works best, right? Because that's someone who will be very actively involved in the feedback loop from both sides, right? So echoing any things from the maintainers or the contributors back to the community, as well as someone who needs to understand the community's needs really well so that they can develop the software in the correct way. So that's really how I see developer relations. And in that case, I mean, that's how I would see it in open source. Anywhere else, I mean, so for instance, if we take something, so I used to do quite a bit of work within the cloud native space and Kubernetes specifically. So there, mainly what developers are looking to learn and to use those tools for is to help them be more productive at work and help them solve a very particular use case for the company that they work for. So in that case, a developer advocate, being in a Kubernetes, say, tooling space, it would make sense that they sit somewhere relatively close to customer success or perhaps product, et cetera, because it's not really, you don't build, it's not like a hobbyist thing necessarily. You don't launch your personal blog on Kubernetes. So it's someone who, has that background.
Sure. No, and that makes total sense. I mean, I think the like when I look at devrel, dev advocacy, any of these terms you want to use about this, evangelism, like so much of it is related to this idea of bottoms up sales. And if people out there don't know, like traditionally, like, the idea is there's top down sales and there's bottoms up. And top down is, the VP of, whatever, of engineering, or the CTO, chief information officer, CIO. Someone's deciding what to buy, and then, all the developers are, gonna use that. And in the last couple of years, what we've seen is the growth of bottoms up, which is the idea that, developers have the power. Developers are going to pick, they're going to pick and choose what they want and what makes the most sense for their workflows, and how to get work done, in the day-to-day and on projects and everything else. And that bottoms up motion really plays well into the narrative of devrel. And a lot of people, people talk about, tech's changing now, interest rates are up. A lot of developers are getting laid off. A lot of hiring decisions are getting pushed further up. A lot of decisions about what to buy are getting pushed further up. And I'm curious, to know, like my personal opinion on this is, like, devrel is going to be here to stay. Like, it's always going to happen as long as there's this bottoms up motion. But in some cases, like, maybe the market has leaned too heavily into developers choosing their workflows. And now that, like, more executives are choosing what to buy and, what their team's going to be working on, versus this more bottoms up motion, maybe that's going to kind of go away a little bit. It could be a 10, 20, 30% contraction. I don't know. But like, I definitely see it happening a little bit already. So I'm very curious, to know, like, what you both think, or Mary, or anyone else in the chats, feel free to chime in, what you think about, like, how the market's moving and how developer relations is going to look like, a year from now, 2 years from now.
Well, I think developer relations, when you talk about that bottom up, it's where you have those companies where we are first, our first interaction with that company is at that developer level. We're building APIs. We're like, you've got, in some of these Wikipedia documents, you've got like Twilio and Stripe and these companies where they're creating something for developers, but the developer isn't necessarily the customer. That's also like there's a great Wikipedia link that you guys have. I'm just going to drop that in the private chat so you can do something with that. But it describes this idea of a developer plus companies and gives this nice breakout of examples, right? So you have like Stripe and Twilio and I don't even know how to say that one. Camunda. They have like business to developer models, and then you have where the product is used by developers. And then you have the developer plus, which is like Slack and Spotify, and like where the developer is making a recommendation, but the company adopts it. I think that's kind of what you were leaning at in some of this discussion, because I think when you're dealing with small and medium-sized companies, that the company leadership, if they're not technical themselves, they're going to lean very heavily on the recommendations of their technical staff. And that's where you're wanting to, if you have a product that serves that company in that market, then you're wanting to maybe talk to and reach those developers.
And you were seeing the DevRel person as somewhat of a liaison almost between the leaders of the company who don't have the technical insights and the customer base and the
Yeah. And I think when you have those larger companies, you are going to have things pushed up higher. And, they're going to say, well, we've selected Salesforce as our platform that we're going to be doing stuff on. And then developers just have to suck it up and do whatever it is they've decided, even if it's hard and doesn't make sense, at a technical level. I think that has happened in the past. And then I think that's why things got pushed down to make technical decisions closer to people who are the engineer kind of that have that perspective and that responsibility. So it's interesting that you say that you think there could be a contraction. I would argue that maybe not in the small and mid-sized companies, though. Not so much there. I don't know.
Interesting. Elena, what do you think about this? And what's happened the last couple of years, and where the next couple of years going?
So, as Mark said, I see developer relations, or really how developers adopt software in that same way, right? Like someone is sitting in an engineering team and they need to solve a very particular problem. Let's say, something from our own experience. So we need something to send emails. We can either engineer it ourselves or use AWS or use SendGrid or whatever. And then someone from the team, or rather several developers, will say, I've used this in the past and I like it. Or, I've read a lot of tutorials that, this would work with our stack. And so, okay, that makes sense then if the majority of the team, or like someone is really passionate about a product, then of course it's going to influence the decision, right? So the goal of DevRel for developer tools is to make it happen so that those conversations happen within teams, really. And in terms of trends, how I've seen it gone down in the last few years was that a lot of dev tool companies then decide that community is the way to go, because you need a community to make sure that those conversations happen. Now, I don't necessarily think that's always the right way to go about things, because now what you see is
don't hold back, Elena. I feel you want to say.
Barry and I both have a lot of thoughts about community and what community means. I've been kicked out of like 10 different dev communities. So anything on community, we'll get into that as our next topic. So segue us in there.
But yeah, now you see every basically company have a community and then call, a Slack channel sometimes, often, and see, their users call them the community. But what I'll add as a last thing there is that developers can see right through this. And they feel when they're being marketed to. So if developer relations or dev advocates or evangelists come to them, to help them, or not necessarily to help them, but to be there, to make their life easy, they can see that when, it's there for that, versus they come to you because community.
Yeah, I mean, community, just by the very nature, is something that has to be organic. That, again, developers are super smart people who are going to be put off by anything that's salesy, marketing forced on you, not to mention the many other problems that if everybody's got their community, there's no community because it's all fractured all over the place, which is problematic on so many levels. What would you guys seeing happen with this? Like, to me, it's hilarious that there's even these people are hired to be community leaders in, for tech or data companies, when that's something that should, again, just if your work is good in what you're doing and interacting with the community and building things, then that emerges naturally, like as a byproduct. It shouldn't be the goal.
I would even add there that like in the last 2 years, I think we're past this now. You know, I can go on a whole thing about interest rates and macroeconomic policy, but like, you know, in 2019, 2020, 2021, there's even a lot of companies that were raising money or like putting it in their slide decks about like, oh, we had 1,000 people in our Slack community or our Discord group. 3 months later, we had 2,000. Oh, 4 months later, we had 8,000. Oh, look at this growth. Like it's like look at this curve. You just have to monetize them. And oftentimes community, you know, a couple of years past in the last couple of years, it would definitely be like, you know, the idea that like, well, look at how fast our community is growing. You know, number of Slack users, number of Discord, whatever. And if we can monetize even only 10% of them, here's what that curve looks like. And so I think there's been a little bit of a perverse incentive around community that came up, I don't know, 2 years ago, a year ago. I think we're a little bit past that now. But I'd be very curious about, you know, to hear about what's right about communities, what's wrong about communities. And I know Mark, you know, speaking with Kurt, you know, you're CEO and founder, like you have like a frameworks approach that you all do. So I'd be very curious to hear about, you know, community and the frameworks approach and how you all look at that.
Yeah, our situation is, what's interesting is I'd like to hear maybe an example, if for the listener, maybe who isn't super DevRel fluent, I guess, but is that idea of what type of company even wants to create a community, right? Like I'm not even sure. Like maybe if I'm Salesforce or something like that, and I'm providing a huge SDK and I want people to use it, so I'm trying to get a community around that. Is that the kind of thing we're thinking of?
That's pretty common. That's a pretty common example. I mean, I think anything that aligns with the job title. So like Salesforce has Salesforce developers, Salesforce engineers. Like they have people that are their identity is tied up in that job title, and then they go to that community and then they, you know, learn things and you know, it comes back to their job and then it goes back and forth. DBT Labs in the data world, that's been another example of one in the last couple of years. There's a job title around it. People go back to the community. It's got 50,000 whatever people now. And I think that anyone who's releasing an SDK, to your point, or is like coalescing around a job title is definitely one of these communities. It could be a framework, it could be an SDK, could be a job title, but that's really where you see a lot of this community stuff develop, and where a lot of, you know, DevRel, evangelism, et cetera, happens.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, that might be different from Fly, is like when you're talking about the history of DevRel kind of coming out of Apple, right? Is that you're providing a new set of hardware, APIs, SDKs, and it's a major investment to get someone to come and support that platform, right? Because they're having to invest in maybe learning a more niche language like Objective-C or Swift or something like that. So you have to convince people to put in the effort to do it. I think it's similar thing could be said for like PlayStation consoles, where you have specific SDK, specific hardware. Xbox is more generic hardware, but it's a lot of SDKs. So you're trying to convince people to invest the time and effort. It's like with Fly, we are a hosting platform, so we don't have any special SDKs. There are APIs that people can use, but you don't even have to touch it. And it's like coming back to your idea of the framework approach. So yeah, there are in dev communities, there are all these frameworks. Like Python has the Django framework, and there's other frameworks too. And in Elixir, there's the Phoenix framework for web development. Ruby on Rails, all these different frameworks exist, and they have their own communities. So we're not trying to build a community. We are trying to interact with an existing community. So I'd love to talk about how we do that, but I'll let Elena weigh in on this too.
Where can I win? What question are we answering here?
Yeah, I think it's about community development and like how much of a community does DevRel need versus like, to Mark's example, like there's already these frameworks, SDKs, these, communities of sorts that exist out there. And for his solution, it's not about making their own community, but about, evangelizing or, putting the word out to these other communities that exist. What do you think about community? And like, what does that mean for DevRel, in your experience or depending on certain companies you've worked with?
Yeah, so again, it really, I think, depends on what the company is doing. I think that's the answer to a lot of, DevRel and community questions in general. I think the goal of someone who is contributing to the community from the top side, so essentially whether that be community manager or that be folks who are writing content or etc. The goal there is to benefit the developers first rather than themselves or the company, which ultimately ends up being the sort of by effect of it all. Because you have a large Slack channel, for instance, or workspace or a Discord, doesn't necessarily mean that you have a community. It can also mean that you have poor support or documentation, and so people come to ask very concrete questions. But onto the main theme here, I think, companies should try to integrate into other communities first, right? Like in the sense of, if you're building, again, Kubernetes tooling, then you might want to try and go to the cloud native community or cloud native community, CNCF, cloud native computing
CNCF,
events,
yeah.
and give talks there or connect with developers there. So you first and foremost understand your audience without going on, like, this is how you can show that you can provide value to those developers. Because if you just go in with your name, especially if you're a new tool, that's not necessarily going to resonate just yet.
I want to ask both of you, and thank you for that, Elena. I want to ask both of you trends that you've seen that you maybe don't like, not to be super negative, but there's a lot of stuff out there we don't like, for me anyway. But first I want to say hello to some of our viewers. First of all, Meredith Alder, she's a data advocate, one of the ones doing really good work. Hi, Meredith. Sunny Rivera from ThoughtSpot. Thanks, Sunny. You've watched 2 episodes now, so you deserve merch. We don't have any, but someday.
We will
Megan
soon.
LeGrave.
We will soon.
Yeah, Megan LeGrave, thanks for watching. I think Megan did the same data science boot camp that I did, if my memory is correct. We'll do a show one day on data and coding boot camps. I see Mark nodding his head. I think you might know some stuff about that stuff. Megan asked,
boot camps is a whole
Megan asked
3
how she could find our
3-episode arc.
Megan asked how she could find the TikTok handle of our Tech Bro of the Week, and Meredith chimed in with that. So you can find that in the feed. You can also find him on, I think, just at Redpoint on TikTok. And Sunny chimed in with a book that I haven't heard of. Maybe you guys have read this, called The New Kingmakers. If you understand the motivations for DevRel, I will look that up, Sunny. It seems like somebody who might be optimistic about DevRel, so I will probably disagree with that author. Random LinkedIn user whose name I cannot see says, I enjoy Rashad's content, but have only seen it on LinkedIn, so get on TikTok. It's amazing. Gabs Ferreira has just joined in. He says that he works at a startup with no open source stuff or staff doing the DevRel job. It's a big challenge. Tell us what you think of the chat, Gabs. And a hello to our friend Timo Decal, who's over in one of the Northern European countries, I forget which. Giovanni Rosado, who says that he learned of fly.io from the Elixir community and forums. So Giovanni, you should connect with Mark and a few other users who I cannot see your names. So hello to everybody. I apologize that I can't see all of your names. In order for me to see your name, you have to follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me. So do that. So yeah, back to the discussion. Elena, do you want to go first on this one, Mark or Lauren? Like, what do you not like in terms of what's happening, or what could be maybe redirected in terms of the way DevRel?
Yeah, I'll go first on this. And like, you know, I'm a numbers person. My background's in data and finance and things like that. And like everybody, you know, everybody's got to prove their value in some way or another. You know, whatever that means. And, you know, it could be, you know, the application that you ship. It could be, you know, the PRs that you know, put forward. If you're a salesperson, it's pretty clear, you know, how much revenue did you bring in? Marketing, how much funnel did you create that led to this much revenue? You know, numbers. And I think one of the criticisms of DevRel, advocacy, this type of stuff that comes up is that there's not, like, no one's really come up with a good number or metric to figure out the success or failure, or how to measure DevRel. And, you know, people look, you know, you can take the number of members in the Slack community that, you know, all the companies that they work for. How many of those companies converted to, I don't know, if you're an open source community, who converted to the cloud product, you know, which is a, you know, monthly or annual contract, and then you have a number. So you have a little bit of a funnel there. But like, I've never understood, and I've not heard anyone like definitively say a great way to incentivize DevRel, maybe to the detriment of the DevRel people. But like, I guess my question here is, how do you think about incentives? And, you know, if you are, you know, partially a marketing role, which, you know, in my opinion, yes, they are all, you know, to an extent, it's marketing, getting your name out there, getting your, you know, your business out there in front of people. Like, how are you incentivized on that, and what works and what doesn't about that? And we can start with, yeah, Elena, I saw you just went off on mute, so I'll start with you.
Yeah, this is one of the two questions that spark a lot of heated discussions. One is, where does DevRel sit? And the other one is, what are the KPIs of a DevRel role and a DevRel organization as a whole? There are several ways to approach this. Again, different organizations have different ideas. Ultimately, if the goal of developer relations, as I mentioned earlier, is to spark those conversations between developers and create advocates within other teams, then I'm a much bigger fan of softer, so to speak, KPIs or metrics. So instead of measuring how many developers joined your Slack space, measure how many developers organically helped each other out on Stack Overflow or wrote content about you, or, you know, if you do have an open source project, see how folks interact. And I think that's I mean, that way you know that you are creating advocates in a way, right? Because they are already going and advocating to the bigger community there and helping each other out.
Are those things that you have seen measured though? Because I find that again, in these roles, the KPIs are just all over the place or non-existent, and it takes some time to measure things like that. And so some organizations might go down just to, you know, it's much simpler just to go off popularity, like how many followers do you have on Twitter or something like that, which is not particularly meaningful, right?
Yeah, and this comes back really, again, what I think is that it's a long game. And what I don't necessarily like about some of the new trends is that folks are expecting super fast results. And again, with all those different numbers, which don't necessarily mean too much. Like, yeah, sure, you can have a lot of Twitter followers, but does not necessarily mean that you have advocates. And I don't think it is really necessarily possible to, if you're setting up a new DevRel organization within your company, to have any KPIs within the first few months, sometimes even a year. It's an investment. It's over time, it will be visible whether it's something that you've succeeded at, or yeah, it's a long game. That's like the best thing that I can say now.
Yeah. Mark, what do you think about KPIs and metrics, and it's both holding people accountable, but it's also incentivizing them or rewarding them. Like, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because like when I first started at Fly, there, what do you measure, right? Like, what is the metric? Because like that's when I was the first person where we're starting off with like a DevRel kind of role. And it's like, at first, I can measure just for myself, like, what am I doing? What are the deliverables or the actions that I'm taking, so I can see that, yes, I'm doing something. But then it's also, like you were saying, if you have an open source project and you want to see how many people are converting through the open source project doing an upgrade, right? So at Fly, it might be that we want to track when someone is launching a new application or project on Fly, that we identify what framework it is. And so then we have some sense of, where is this coming from? This is a Django app. This is an Elixir app. And then you can eventually start looking at what profitability, like, are they upgrading and using more servers? Are they making more capacity? Are they taking advantage of unique features that we have? Things like that. So I think it comes down to, I do believe it's the long game. Like, I just think of like a blog post, right? You could put out a blog post that's, something that's very of the moment, like a news item or something like that. You might get some traffic short term, but there's no lasting effect for that. And then there's like evergreen type of content, and you can still get clicks and traffic for years after, with that kind of stuff. So I do think I totally agree that it's a long game, and you have to think about it that way. And you have to work out what are the things that we can track that make sense for our application, for our product, platform, whatever it is. And you have to adjust, because I haven't personally seen that go negative, right? Where you're saying this is, you're creating perverse incentives. So I would love to hear an example of like where it goes wrong, because that sounds fun.
Before that, I want to, and I think the key word, Elena said it and Mark reinforces, is the long game. And when you're talking, if your KPIs are coming from marketing or sales, they're not going to understand that or get that. And that's where you need an organization where the C-suite and product engineering are really the ones maybe driving, or the soul of DevRel, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have some comments here from Noshnika, who has been in a number of DevRel roles. Noshnika, I forget where you are now, but she said that she's bounced between jobs a bit in the past. And once your boss starts talking about results metrics, I know my job won't last 6 months. So very much to that point. And she added, at small startups, you can see situations where GitHub stars are a key metric for success. I think DevRel can help you deliver that. Yeah, that's something that's a lot closer to the work, to the crux of what DevRel should be, something like a GitHub star, as opposed to like the number of impressions you get on LinkedIn or TikTok or whatever, right? You want to say something?
I'm very much, this is just my background, data finance person. Driving a conversion to a GitHub star, driving a conversion to community member, driving a conversion to, something that is not revenue focused, I think is very much part of the past couple of years of, low interest rates, tech going crazy, everyone's had a good, everyone's drinking champagne, having a good time. And I think that like now going forward, like in the same way that like, marketing budgets are getting, pulled open, and hey, what are you all actually working on all day? What are you driving forward? And sales teams and everything else like is getting put under a little bit more of a magnifying glass. Like I don't know if that whole like GitHub star mentality is going to hold much further. Um, and as long as the economy's down, the market's down, companies, a lot of these companies that have devrels are venture capital funded on the private markets. They've raised a lot of money or some amount of money, and like what are they looking for right now? Well, they're looking to save costs, and they're looking to like drive revenue. Like, and I think that like things like GitHub stars are like one layer back from revenue. Like, if you look at a funnel of like how the developer moves through your product and how an organization that employs that developer moves, oh, we heard about Fly. Oh, we heard about this other company. Okay, that's interesting. And it might take another 2 months to convert them. And there might be a point in there where they trigger something like a GitHub star or something else. And that looks good and it is good. But until they like, until there's like a sign on the line, like, credit card swiped or, invoice sent and paid, that's where I see this whole space going in the next couple of years. And I think, I can be wrong, but I think that like a lot of incentives around advocacy, evangelism, devrel, everything else like that, like the more you can get to that funnel and drive that piece, like drive that conversion, or even post conversion, help people, interact with your product more and more throughout their life cycle is going to become more important than maybe like other metrics that, maybe a little bit more up in the air than things that are revenue facing. And that's just my own opinion. That's what I've seen the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 months. I see no reason why things, that would change. But yeah, that's my own thoughts there. I want to ask you, Mary. You've had developer evangelism, advocacy type roles. Like, where do you think it goes wrong, and where do you think it's right, and where do you?
I would agree with you that the smaller companies that aren't making revenue really have no business hiring these people if these are fairly high significant salaries, and you've got to be counting every buck when you're not making money yourself, when you're not yet profitable. And the devrel or evangelism work to a certain degree can be done by people within the company without them having that title if you're smart. So that's one problem. If you are going to invest in it, you have to understand that it's a long game over several years, and really the people you hire really support them in that long game. And I think that there is often a disconnect between the executives and the people they hire into that, who the C-suite maybe doesn't necessarily understand that. And I've seen that mostly with, I get recruited for a lot of these roles, and sometimes I take the interviews just for fun. And I've ended up just kind of having fun, like pushing back in the first interview. And I've realized I should stop doing this because I'm basically giving them free consulting. Like I'll say, like, how do you see this role? Who would it report to? What are the KPIs? And they have
you're just making the role for them. Right.
They have no clue. And there are tricky roles. It's hard to find someone who's really good technically, who knows how to build, and who wants to do all this other stuff, right? So the final problem, I'd say, because Mark said he wanted to see some of what maybe others see as being problematic. Among the people who are hired into these, obviously, some of my best friends do it. They're brilliant. Some of the people chiming in are doing it brilliantly. Good work being done. There are also roles that sometimes attract grifters, people who talk a really nice talk, but don't do a whole lot. And that's problematic to me, just like ethically in any industry, right? So I don't know if you guys have seen that, or you see other problems.
I see that, and I'll let Mark and Elena chime in on this, but like I see that when the role becomes more about being an influencer and having social media presence and, I don't know, having hot takes on, I don't know, the new, Golang, this, that, or the other, and then stirring up, drama on Twitter and being a devrel. Like that's more just you being an influencer on the dime of a company than it is you necessarily pushing whatever company you work for, their product forward. And I've really like I love the idea of influencers because 5 years ago it would be like someone on Instagram and they'd show you like, oh, here's my new drink and here's my new lifestyle and here's how you can buy this coconut soda that blah 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 and use code Lauren 20 to get 20% off. And like I've seen this kind of enter the developer world in the last couple of years. A lot of investors will talk about like prosumers. And so like, oh, developers aren't consumers, because they work for a company and they're buying stuff for their company. They're a prosumer and they can spend a little bit of money. They might buy, $20 coconut soda that an influencer sent them, but they might buy, $1,000 a month thing, some SaaS product or some infrastructure thing or whatever. And I think it's really interesting to see the consumerization of, IT and data and, software development. It's been really interesting. And I think that like a lot of these influencer people have gotten into this devrel and advocacy world. They may have taken over a little bit of the advocacy title, maybe a little bit of the devrel title, but I think actually like as our economy like kind of compresses a little bit, they're all kind of getting pushed out. But it's been a little fascinating to watch over the last 2 years or so with these influencers. And I'd be curious to hear from we've got a few minutes here, we can wrap up, but I'd be curious to hear from both Mark and Elena, like how do you think about being an influencer versus helping the developer? And is there a spectrum there? And like, if you go too tacky, like developers are going to see right through it, even though you might have, 30,000 Twitter followers or something. Like, how have you seen this play out? And Elena, I'll ask you first, because I think you've consulted with a few organizations around this and, you've seen a lot and, curious to hear your thoughts.
Tech and developers exist outside of Twitter. In fact, the majority of folks aren't on Twitter, and I think it's very easy to forget. Maybe I'm a bit of a romanticist in this, but I think ultimately, whether you're an influencer or not an influencer, your goal needs to be to do it for the end developer, not for yourself. And whichever company goes into developer relations or has a developer relations organization, they need that, sort of an altruistic almost view to gain any benefits. I've seen a bunch of tech influencers being hired for these roles. I probably haven't. It's not something that I would necessarily recommend, for instance, for my clients. In some cases, yes, definitely. I mean, for instance, if you're writing content, chances are that, someone who is the tech influencer, they will, the tech influencer, that's such a strange terminology. They will have
it's a thing now. It's definitely a thing.
It's definitely a thing. Yeah. But it's, that person might be really good for content writing and creation, but dev evangelism advocacy is so much more than that. Like, someone who goes out and speaks to users and understands their problems, that might be an engineer might do better there.
I'd like to talk a little bit about what I think is different how we do it at Fly. Because we are trying to interact with many different communities, right? We're not trying to build a community. It's like there already are these communities. So the way I think about it is like a government or a nation, they hire an ambassador who speaks the language of that people. They live there, and an ambassador like has two jobs, right? They need to understand the language and the culture of that community where they live, and then they represent those needs back to the organization. And then they also are a representative of that company or that government to that community. It's like, these are our interests. These are what we want to share and communicate to you. It's like they're on that boundary, right? Of they're inside the organization, but they're on that edge where they're touching the community. And so at Fly, what that means is we hire people who are already in the Django community or the Rails community, and they understand the needs of the community, the language, because I find it remarkable how different, the way they talk about their projects, their concerns, everything it's very specific, and they have their own culture, right? Like, whether they celebrate or avoid, very bombastic personalities, right? There's different cultures. And so then at Fly, we are trying to also improve our product for that community. So that ambassador role is, what does the Python community need? How does it work? How do they want it to hook into their tooling? How can we make our platform better for them? So that's developer first, I think, right? Like, we're trying to make things better for them, but then we're also wanting to let them know, hey, we exist. We can help you solve problems, right? So we're trying to represent ourselves to the community through that person as well.
I think that's a great space to end, because I have a meeting, and we probably all do. And I think it's a good note to end on. And we should have said this at the top of the show. We brought Mark and Elena on because you are two of the people that we, appreciate the work you do. It's the true spirit of DevRel. Again, whether that pure DevRel spirit will be allowed to be continued in the economy with the way things are going and the trends that are happening in tech, and then more broader on a macroeconomic level. Who knows? That's a further discussion. We could talk a lot longer. I think the best thing is for you guys to put in the comments, if you don't mind, where people can find you, whether it's Twitter or LinkedIn, and in the other communities. If you don't mind putting that in after the show. I'm super grateful for your time, for your hot takes. And Lauren, let's give you the last word.
Yeah, thank you both for joining. I think it's interesting to see where DevRel is going to go in the next couple, months, years. I think a lot of the influencers that we talked about are going to get shepherded out. I think it's going to come back to like serving the developer, and I'm excited to see where things go. And thank you both, Mark and Elena, for joining us today.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
We'll have you back.
Thank you.
You're true bros now.
Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Bye.
Got to press end here. There we go.